Yes, it is that time of the week. We are thrashing it out. And today we're talking about annual leave. So how many weeks of annual leave do you think should be legally applicable to Australian workers? We are a workers' paradise here in Australia, or supposedly we are. So we get 4 weeks here. And that's been that way since the Whitlam government. Now, some would argue that times have changed then and we work in different ways. And you probably need more than 4 weeks off a year, given that you don't just do 9 to 5s anymore. You're always on your emails or your phones and everything else. Working has changed. So should you get more than 4 weeks leave a year? Should it be 6 weeks? If you look at other countries, 5 weeks leave is normal. In France, Sweden, Austria. In Finland, you get 6 weeks leave if you've been at the company for more than a year. 131873, what do you reckon? Is 4 weeks enough time off? Or should Australians get 6 weeks leave a year legally binding? I'll get to your feedback next, but first let's thrash it out. Joining me, I've got Jonathon Woolfrey. He's an HR and workplace expert, and he argues for more annual leave. G'day, Jonathon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And Saul Eslake is an independent economist. Wonderful bloke, Saul, and he argues against more annual leave. Hello, Saul.
Hello, Chris, and thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you for coming on. Jonathon, I'll start with you. In short, why is 6 weeks annual leave a good idea?
It's time to rip this bandaid off and go to 6 weeks. In the 1950s, it was about 2 weeks. In the 1990s, it went to 4 weeks. And as you've mentioned in there, Chris, other countries have moved ahead of Australia in regards to what they've offered their employees. With 2 people working in most families, it's time to actually acknowledge that it's very difficult to organise all the things you need to do from work and play and family perspective. And you need a different way of being able to manage and deal with that in a modern workplace. So it's time for 6 weeks. I think we need to move towards that and acknowledge that all employers should probably look at these flexibilities that are on offer.
Saul, bit of an impost on businesses though.
Well, it would be. I'd make the point, though, to begin with, that in addition to the 4 weeks annual leave that workers are entitled to in Australia, in most states there are at least 10 public holidays a year, so you're getting, in effect, 6 weeks, not consecutively, but you're getting the equivalent of 6 weeks leave already if you include public holidays. That means that a full-time worker works 6 weeks a year, typically, and if you were to grant an additional 10 days or 2 weeks of annual leave, that would be equivalent to an increase in the costs to employers of about 4.5%. Now, that might sound not very much, and you might say that could be absorbed by profitable businesses. Not all businesses, especially small businesses, are that profitable, and the result, I think, would be in current circumstances, and future circumstances may be different, but if we're talking about present circumstances, then I think the result would be some combination of job losses at smaller businesses and larger businesses seeking to recoup that 4.5% increase in their wages bill by increasing prices, as they've been doing quite merrily over the past 15 months, much to the chagrin of the Reserve Bank, which has responded to that by putting interest rates up.
Well, here's one for you, Jonathon. I think that's a good point that Saul makes. If you give people an extra 2 weeks of annual leave, are you going to be less inclined to give them a pay rise?
It's a good question, and I think implementation, if forging ahead with this, is key, and how we manage all sectors and all workers. But just to say that there's not a direct... People don't sit at their desks for 38 hours a week in all things and just produce at a consistent rate. In being at the workplace less, which, as Saul has pointed out, this might be the case, it doesn't necessarily mean we get less output from many, many people in the workplace. There's evidence 4-day working weeks is hot right now, and there's a lot of evidence emerging that actually doesn't reduce the amount of output that people put in. It lets them work more productively when they are at work and take the appropriate amount of break and rest. So yes, there is some impost, but I think that a lot of that will be mitigated by improved mental health, workplace productivity, and organisations can probably do more with less.
Saul, I know you said that, it'd be close to 4% on top of the cost of an employer's wage bill. A lot of employees at the moment, though, Saul, doing a fair bit of work for nothing.
They are. I don't dispute that. I think the mental health and other benefits that Jonathon was referring to when people have had additional leave have come from experiments, not by giving people 2 weeks of extra annual leave, but shortening the working week. That is to say, working, for example, 4 days a week rather than 5, if that's the normal working period, as opposed to taking an additional 2 weeks off in one block. Now, those experiments might be worth pursuing. And of course, if individual employers want to give their employees more leave, or they negotiate that as part of negotiations over a wider range of conditions and pay of employment, then that's up to them individually. What is of greater concern to me in terms of the impact on the economy, on employment and inflation, is if the government were to make it mandatory, which I think would have the adverse consequences to which I was referring.
Sure, but there are many employees who are sick to the back teeth of doing all this work for their employer for no money. They don't get paid for it. They're on their phones late at night, on their phones early in the morning, running emails, all that sort of stuff. They're doing it from home. It's eating into family time. It's eating into off time. They don't get a dollar for it. As soon as they ask for either a pay rise or maybe some more annual leave, oh no, it's going to put the cost of our business doing business up 4%. You can understand why workers are getting jack of it.
Of course you can understand that, although I'd also make the observation that by comparison with the last time an additional week of annual leave was granted under the Whitlam government in the mid-1970s, there's a higher proportion of the workforce, especially women, who are working part-time and who therefore aren't under the same sort of pressure that a full-time worker might be. So I think that's a relevant observation to make in this particular context. The other observation I'd make is, of course, that with the labour market so tight, with employers desperate to find particularly skilled workers, a worker who feels that he or she is being mistreated by their employer in the ways that you describe has probably never had a better opportunity to seek alternative employment under better conditions than the ones currently being experienced.
I don't even think it's mistreated. I think it's par for the course now. Jonathan, I will ask you though, and Saul makes the point, if you haven't got businesses, you haven't got jobs, and if the cost of doing business increases with more annual leave for workers, you run the risk of those jobs not existing to have the annual leave in the first place.
Absolutely, and it needs to be factored into how this would look if it was mandated, regulated by the government, if it was mandatory. I think there's plenty of vehicles to do that. There's 122 modern awards which could be looked at one by one to make sure that each industry or each sector could manage and sustain that kind of thing. But it could create opportunities for more employment. It may have impact on small business, etc. It may give more flexibility. I know that we talk, and Saul did mention in there, the inflationary pressures at the moment. Instead of giving a pay rise, maybe give more annual leave. Doesn't directly impact cost. Obviously, if a person's not there, you need to make sure the work's getting done. But using these kind of methods might improve the way that workplaces are able to hire people, their own flexibility, and help organisations keep up with others, because yes, as Saul mentioned, there is a war for talent, and this may actually assist rather than hinder.
Righto, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time. We're not going to solve it here, but it's certainly a conversation worth having. Saul Eslake, Jonathon Woolfrey, thank you for jumping on.
Your pleasure. Thank you.